Welcome to Design Emergency. I'm Paola Antonelli, and together with Alice Rawsthorne, I founded this podcast and platform in 2020, in the thick of the COVID-19 pandemic and the lockdown, to highlight the fundamental role of design in all aspects of life, and especially in big emergencies or small ones. And among the big, humongous actually, and wicked ones is, of course, the environmental crisis, to which Alice and I have devoted dozens of interviews trying to provide you with as many design-infused angles of attack as possible. And I think you will really love today's with its injection of cautious optimism and pragmatism. Brought to you by our guest, marine biologist, climate justice activist, author Ayana Elizabeth Johnson. Ciao, Ayana.
Hello, Paula. Great to be with you.
I'm glad that you're here too. So, Ayana has many different hats, but she is officially the founder of Urban Ocean Lab, which is a think tank dedicated to addressing climate issues in coastal cities. She's a frequent advisor on environmental policy and strategy to governmental agencies, to foundations, and also to multinational corporations. She's an author, and her new book, What If We Get It Right?, will be or was, depending on when you're listening, released on September 17, 2024. In total disclosure, I am on the advisory board of the Urban Ocean Lab, and I'm one of the interviewees in her book. So, Ayana, thank you for making me part of your wonderful career and life. And I would like to understand how you came to marine biology and from marine biology to climate justice activism.
The first part of the story, and most of my story is not very unique. It's that sense of falling in love with nature, falling in love with the ocean as a kid, just going to the beach, swimming, learning to snorkel, seeing a coral reef for the first time. All of these incredible, colorful fishes and sea urchins and corals. And how do you not fall in love with that? And to learn that that could be a job, like hanging out with all these cool creatures. I, of course, was like, yes, yes, please tell me which classes I need to take or whatever needs to happen next. That was my first dream job when I was 5. And often when I'm out speaking, I ask people, how many wanted to be a marine biologist at some point. And it's a very common dream job. I guess that just is proof of how stubborn and tenacious I am.
I was on the astronaut side, so okay.
Yeah, there we go. That's another one. But I think if it weren't for being able to connect marine science with social issues, it might have lost its appeal for me. When I was doing my PhD in marine biology out in California at Scripps Institution of Oceanography, I was scuba diving and counting fish and doing all this research, but it was very much dedicated to trying to understand how to better manage fishing and tourism on coral reefs. It wasn't purely a curiosity of the creatures themselves, but how can humans live in better harmony? How can fishing and other environmental policies help to keep things in balance? So to me, it's always been like this crazy puzzle of, yes, the science, the biology, the ecology, but also economics and sociology and often like anthropological history, as well as law and policy. And unfortunately, politics is always part of it too. So that's what keeps me so fascinated, is that it's this morass of all of these different variables that we need to figure out in order to have a healthy ocean.
It's funny that you said unfortunately about politics, because I had that name that was ringing in my ears, and I was thinking, when is she going to say it? And politics is life, right? And you're from Brooklyn, and you were from Brooklyn even when you went and saw the coral. So in a way, it was about the density of living together. And this aspect of the rights of both the creatures in the ocean and the creatures and the responsibility of the creatures on the earth is something that I would like to ask you more about. I think it's important to explain to our audience what climate justice is and how it is different from other goals that climate activists strive for.
So, climate justice, if we had it, would mean that everyone has the equal access to a healthy environment, to clean air, to clean water, to beautiful parts of nature. And right now, that's just simply not the case. The The pollution is not spread equally across the planet. The downsides of our fossil fuel based economy and all of the extraction of Earth's resources are borne disproportionately by poor communities and communities of color. If we think about who's living near power plants, who has their water polluted, who is dealing with poisons and pesticides, it's people who don't have a lot of other choices. And that's injustice. That's not fair. And the climate justice movement is just saying, like, hey, we all deserve clean air and water. Um, and the impacts of climate change in particular. So that's sort of environmental justice I'm describing. But for climate in particular, thinking about the impacts of storms and droughts and heat waves. Oftentimes, it's people who can't afford air conditioning or live in low-lying areas because those are the less expensive places to live that are getting really pummeled by these climate impacts. I know in New York City, for example, the public housing, low-income housing is much more likely to be located in flood-prone areas that flood in storms, right? And the same with just the amount of trees that are in poor areas in the cities, in poorer neighborhoods. There are fewer trees, which means it can be 5 or 10 degrees hotter because there's no shade, there's no evapotranspiration helping to cool just through the magical process of photosynthesis. So this is where we're starting to talk about the connections, right, between science and policy and design, because how we design our cities, how we think about using our coastlines, it really is in large part, a question of, yeah, how do we design a healthy relationship between humans and the rest of nature that is equal for all humans?
You talked about the other side. It's not really the other side of the medal, but it's another consequence. The fact that preserving the ocean, for instance, is also preserving culture. It was an experience that you had when you visited Jamaica, where your father is from. And the fact that eroding these natural ecosystems means also obliterating what's been there for a really long time.
Yeah. I mean, the stories that my father told me of his childhood, right, where he would go to the beach and catch a fish and fry it up and eat it for dinner, with you would be pretty much guaranteed to catch something. That's not something you can count on anymore. And something that is really sad is to go to markets in the Caribbean and see that a lot of the fish are imported. A place that's for so long been dependent on the sea, had seafood as a large part of a healthy diet, to have to import Alaskan pollock or shrimp from Thailand or whatever is just not the way that I think anybody really wants to live. Fishermen, of course, have a very hard time making a living because of that. But I think there's this reality that the things that we did as a human species, as particular communities and cultures, when there were 1,000 people, 10,000, 100,000 people on an island, we can't do the same way when there are millions on an island, billions on the planet. It's some of these traditions don't scale, essentially. And so it's a very hard conversation to have about how culture and traditions need to adapt as our world is changing.
So, what can design and art do for climate justice? You're a friend of design and of art. And so, we want to learn from you how we can be of better help.
I love to be called a friend of design and art. That's absolutely how I feel. My father, as you know, was an architect and a potter. And so I grew up completely surrounded by art and design, and walking through New York City with him, pointing out what was good design and what was bad design. And the Chrysler building has great shoulders on it, and these other buildings are trash. And you can see the lintels, how they're already falling apart. And so this is a big, and how you can always judge a man by his shoes, like all of this stuff about just investing in beautiful things. I think about this as a question of sustainability because good design is durable. It lasts a long time. It has often a timelessness to it, even if it reminds us of the time when it was created. I mean, I still have in my home today all the furniture that my parents bought in the 70s. The sofa's been reupholstered once, but the light fixtures are the same, the chairs, the tables, the pottery my father made. And it's such a joy to be surrounded by things that were created with such care, designed with such a clear sense of purpose and how they would be used and constructed. And I think a large part of what we've lost in this high-paced consumerism and fast fashion and all of that is quality, is durability, is repairability. Even if we want to fix things, they're so flimsy that often you can't, or there are not the parts. And so when I think about the role of design, I often just think about if we can just make things carefully and make them to last, that would be such a big step in the right direction. Really value the materials.
Thank you. Yeah, definitely design in all its different forms, from architecture to furniture making to visualization design, can play a big role. And I'm just very happy that people like you start to really involve it. Well, you've been doing it for a really long time, but involve it in all of your different plans. And so this leads me to talk about the Urban Ocean Lab. So you
Yeah.
are a co-founder of the Urban Ocean Lab, together with climate policy expert Jean Flemma and with designer Marquise Stillwell.
Mhm.
And Urban Ocean Lab is a think tank that is dedicated to addressing climate issues in coastal cities. You have taught me that, for instance, New York City has more than 500 miles of coastline,
Yeah.
the city, which is unbelievable. So, how did the lab come to be?
It's so funny. As a kid who grew up in Brooklyn and wanted to be a marine biologist, I never thought of New York City as a viable place to do that because I thought about the water's got to be crystal clear and turquoise and warm, or that's not marine biology. But we actually have, seahorses and oysters and all of these amazing things living in New York Harbor. And the water in New York Harbor is cleaner now than it's been in 100 years, thanks to the Clean Water Act and reducing pollution upstream, up the Hudson River, etc. And so that to me is such an amazing example of why policy matters. And so in creating this policy think tank, it really is, for me, the heart of my own personal climate action Venn diagram, which is how I think about finding our customized roles in climate solutions. So if one circle is what are we good at? I know about the ocean, I know about policy, I know something about communications. What is the work that needs doing? In this case, it's helping coastal cities with policies that can enable them to adapt to climate changes. Sea level rise is a huge one, and storms, and thinking about how coastal ecosystems can be part of that, how offshore renewable energy can be part of that. But the third circle of this Venn diagram is what brings you joy. And for me, actually, design is a big part of that. I want climate adaptation to be beautiful. I don't want to live in this sort of like cobbled together thoughtlessly world. I want to live in a place that is really lovingly designed. And the other thing that brings me joy is changing laws. I think we need to change the rules of the game because right now it's just rigged so that we lose. And so when I think about all these ways that my brain works, the way I want to contribute to things, helping to lead this policy think tank for the future of coastal cities is just right in that sweet spot for me. And it's been such a joy to collaborate with the team over the last few years and start to release different policy memos and frameworks. And we've actually just recently released a resource hub with hundreds of vetted resources, data sets, legislative examples, scientific articles, memos, reports from all sorts of incredible experts around the world because we don't have time to each be reinventing the wheel. We need to just learn from each other, glean the lessons, and carry those forward. So it really is an exciting part of my work to be able to do that.
It's exciting to be part of it also as an advisor. And I have to say that, besides Marquise, who is a designer and a co-founder, but then also in the advisory boards, there's me, and then there's Kate Orff, who's an amazing landscape architect, and other architecture experts. So
And Brian Lee, who's a pioneer of design justice out of New Orleans now.
how do we contribute, and what do you see the role of people that are design minded as in this kind of situation?
I mean, design is such a broad term, right? So if we break it down a bit, I think, and I've learned this from you in interviewing you for my book, we're designing processes, we're designing objects, we're designing buildings. All of this is helping to design to shape culture. I think about, how do we shift the status quo towards conservation of electricity, not just renewables? How do we make the more environmentally responsible options more convenient and appealing? I think design can make a sustainable lifestyle more viable. Because right now we have all of this sort of disposable plastic crap. We've got everything that's based on fossil fuels that needs to go. So we have to redesign our society from one that is extractive to one that is regenerative. And that is a huge task that we desperately need designers to help with. But this question I keep coming back to is, what if climate adaptation is beautiful? Because if it's a fight between sort of something apocalyptic and ugly or something that's beautiful, I think it'll become a much easier decision for people. And I don't mean beauty in sort of like a fluffy way. I mean it in like a philosophical, sort of spirited way. It's like something more firm, not an ethereal beauty, but something we can really hold on to.
Amen. Amen. And you're always trying to communicate this to as many people as possible, the importance of joy, the importance of beauty, and how nature helps us towards that goal. Also, in 2023, you invaded my territory and you curated a show at Pioneer Works, the cultural center in Brooklyn that thrives on the coming together of art and science. And the show was called Climate Futurism. And I would like you to tell us about it, please. How was the experience and how did you curate it?
Yeah, I had this opportunity through the Headland Center for the Arts to collaborate with a few artists around this theme. And because I just feel like we need artists to help us see glimpses of the future so that we are inspired, motivated to create it. We have so many images in popular culture about a climate apocalypse, so much. We've got a pretty clear vision of what doom looks like and fire and brimstone and disaster, but we don't actually have a lot of visions of getting it right, of what it looks like if we implement all the solutions we have. And I think it's important to say we basically have the solutions we need, right? We know how to do public transit and electrify transportation. We know how to farm in ways that are more regenerative. We know how to green buildings, to make energy use more efficient, to restore and protect ecosystems, right? Like all of this is very possible. We just have to do it like all at once, very quickly. And that sort of kick in the pants that comes with seeing these clear visions of possible climate futures is, I think, something we need a lot more of. So I was really excited for this opportunity to curate a show at Pioneer Works, which is where I met you actually at in their science studio at one of their events. And I've been curating now for years there a conversation series called Science and Society, bringing together people with different perspectives on key issues of, climate policy or plastics or public knowledge or seafood. And it's been really such a delight. You and Olulake and Jay Foos were my guests for the previous one on climate futurism to go at this show. And I actually found in curating the show, it was much harder than I thought because working directly with artists on creating new works is, of course, like a very sensitive and personal process for artists. And on top of that, I think some of the artists I selected had not really done work specifically on climate themes before. So, of course, they're concerned citizens and aware of what's happening in the world, but it had not really been at the core of their work. And I think in hindsight that there was a little bit of almost like throat clearing involved as you're learning more deeply about, oh gosh, like this is really bad. What are we going to do? What does this mean for my family? What does this mean for my culture, my community, the ways that we're all used to living? There's this sort of fear that we have to process through our systems first. And if it's your first time coming at these topics, there's an instinct to look backwards instead of forward. So it's actually a big challenge encouraging the artists to do climate futurism work, to really project what it would look like if we get it right in different ways, instead of something that's more sort of nostalgic and melancholy in some ways. And the exception to that, of course, is Ola Lakin, whose entire body of work is focused on creating these magical mashups of, photo montages and 3D printed sculptures. And that is like what he does every day. So he was like, oh, more of this? Great. I'll create this magical world connecting Brooklyn to farms upstate where we have a restored food system and everything looks dope.
It is really the embodiment, or at least the depiction of your philosophy. What I love about Lake's work, and for those of you who are listening, you can find our interview with Lake and also, images of his work in our Instagram platform. What I love about Lake is that his future is possible, it's exciting, it's at the same time viable and also not completely suffocatingly regulated. It is truly something that one can wish for. And that is also the philosophy of your book. What if we get it right? Question mark. The book is a collection of illuminating interviews, really, with scientists, with activists, with designers, and with this one curator that is also punctuated by very lucid lists of problems and potential solutions. How did the format of the book come to be?
Sort of haphazardly, I guess. I think the first concept of the book, actually, the title, when I sold the book to the publisher, was How Humans Survive Humanity. So I was just thinking, like, how do we get ourselves together, right? How are we going to shift culture and adapt in a way that we can make it through this crisis, which is not quite as inspiring a title. I actually don't remember when the title emerged, but framing it as a question, and thank you for emphasizing the question mark. People are often like, it's such an optimistic, hopeful thing. I'm like, it's a question. Like, what if we get it right? I don't know if we're going to. In some ways, it's a long shot. We've never achieved something like this as a species before. So, like, we should absolutely try, but I'm not so naive to think that everything's going to be fine in the end. I mean, I'm a scientist. I've seen the graphs. I understand the probabilities of these things. But we do have a chance to build a much better future than we otherwise would. And so I was trying to show as many aspects of getting it right as I could fit in the book. And much to my editor's chagrin, the book kept getting longer and longer. So I was like, oh, I need to add an interview on design. I need to add an interview on AI. I need to better understand the role of indigenous activism and traditions in getting it right. I need to think about not just farming, but forestry. We can't be like shipping wood all over the world. Like, what are we doing? And so I just kept adding, and there's still so many more conversations I wish had been in here. And I am thinking about starting some sort of podcast or something to carry on these questions and conversations. So we'll see. The thing that unlocked the book for me was actually putting it into interview format. There's 20 interviews in the book, and I find it really frustrating when I'm reading a book and the author is leaning on all these experts to make the case, quoting all of their research at length, And I'm just like, should I just go read their book? Why am I reading your book? And so, because I'm so sensitive to that as a reader, I didn't want to do that as a writer. And I thought some of these topics would be much more interesting and delightful if it was just a chat. If you and I were chatting about design, if I'm chatting with a farmer, and these are all people who I've known for years, collaborated with often, and have a deep respect for, and a friendship that makes the back and forth of it all just much more approachable, accessible, readable.
Can you give us some names of the people that you have interviewed?
Oh, I would love to. So, Leah Penniman is a Black farmer upstate New York who's one of the interviewees. Dr. Kate Marvel is a NASA climate scientist. We mentioned already Brian Lee and Kate Orff on landscapes and neighborhoods. We have Bill McKibben. I interviewed, his chapter is called Divest and Protest on the Role of Banks and Our Financial System in all of this. Jigar Shah, who leads the Loan Program Office at the Department of Energy, that has like $400 billion they're giving out to support the renewable energy transition. I interviewed director Adam McKay and producer Franklin Leonard about what it would mean to get it right in Hollywood and my dream of having more climate rom-coms. Kendra Pierre-Lewis, who's an incredible climate journalist, on how important the news is to getting it right and how that is in many ways the epicenter of everything else ripples out from. This emergency management PhD, Dr. Samantha Montano, who's talking about disasterology and how we plan for and recover from disasters. There's more. I mean, I wish I had interviewed someone on fashion and more on like electoral politics. There's just more conversations I want to have.
You describe the book as joyous and provocative. And also inside the book, you talk about joyous work. And you gave a TED talk that's called How to Find Joy in Climate Action. And we know that joy is trending right now, also because of Vice President Kamala Harris' presidential run. But on the other hand, a good friend once told me that the real engine that can topple tyrants and change nations is hope. What do you think? Is joy enough?
I think sometimes the more important word is satisfaction, like feeling satisfied that we are contributing to solutions in some way, having that sense of gratification that our work and our lives have meaning, I think is even more important than joy in a lot of ways. So to me, it's about how can we be useful as opposed to how can we be hopeful. I basically have, I would describe it as a tenuous relationship with hope. I'm not a hopeful person. I'm not an optimist. I'm a realist. I'm a scientist, but I still believe in possibility. Like scientifically, it is true that there are innumerable possible futures, and what we each do will shape which future we get. And so to me, hope has in its definition this expectation that it's going to be okay in the end. And we actually don't know whether that's true. I think that expectation is a bit naive in some ways, but that doesn't mean we get to give up on life on Earth. Like, who are we to give up on this
Oh,
planet
no.
or each other? And so it's funny because I don't think I'm hopeful, but I'm also not hopeless in a way. I'm just like, well, we have to try.
You just want to get going with it and try to make it happen, right? You need to
Yeah, I
try.
mean that sense that change is possible, um, that I really hold on to this word possibility. To me, I think the goal is transformation. This is not about tiny piddling little changes at this point. We have to transform our society and our economy. And that takes a lot of inspiration and motivation and energy and joy and all of that. I mean, hope, I think, is optional.
The proof that you have design in your blood, design in architecture and landscape design and everything else, is that you end your book with a great, great section in which you describe what the world would be if we get it right. So thank you, Ayana, for this great interview.
Thank you, Paula. There's one thing I wanted to specifically thank you for, as in particular in our conversation. When I interviewed you for the book, you were talking about the need for a new Hippocratic oath for designers in the context of the climate crisis. How can designers be part of the solution? And so many different people I interviewed were talking about the need to do no harm, which is the line from that Hippocratic oath that people most remember. And I asked you, like, does this exist? Do we need to create this? And I was talking about this with my friend Juana Stănescu, another architect. I seem to be constantly surrounded by architects. And she and I actually wrote what we called a climate oath together to seed some of that responsibility and commitment in our way. So I just wanted to thank you for that. That's one of the last chapters of the book. And it starts: first, move from I to we. Second, do no harm. Third, less is more. And possibility exists.
This is Design Emergency. You have just heard from former marine biologist, still marine biologist, but now also climate justice activist and author and much more, Ayana Elizabeth Johnson. And remember, you can find images concerning this interview in our Instagram feed at design.emergency. And you can dig through our archives to find more interviews by myself and by Alice Rawsthorne with designers, architects, and others who are actively working to plan a better world for all humans, for all species, and for all planets. Thank you for being here.